Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. It's always good to be together on the Lord's Day, open the Bible, and read some passages that are there and reflect upon them and see how they might fit in our situation today. As I've mentioned several times, there are really basically three steps to examine a biblical text. But I think you can even go in a much broader way and suggest that there are three steps or phases in which we examine anything in life. One is to observe what it's there. And then secondly is to examine it in its context or interpret the situation that is there. And then third, what difference does it make? So what? And so those are three steps I think it's helpful for us when we're looking at a biblical passage, is to look and see what it says and consider the original context. Who said it? Where was it said? Why was it said? How was it said? Was it an exaggeration or straight fact? I mean, what was it? And examine the language of it and how it was expressed. And then, after we've done that, we bring it to 2025 and ask the question, what difference does it make now? And a lot of times we get eager to get to that last point. We want to, so what? What's it mean? How does it apply to me today, now, in my problems? And I understand the impatience. That's normal, I suppose. But that step will not be effective or correct unless we go through the other two steps. So it's good to see you today. We're looking at the middle part of Ezekiel in the first section, chapters 9 through 11. This is the schedule we've kind of set for ourselves this quarter. And today, the 26th of the first month, we're looking at chapters 9 through 11. And my thought process in this is that there's more material to examine in 45-minute Bible class in just a half of one of these chapters. So what we have to do is kind of look through in a holistic survey way of picking out those things that might be, real important or the most important overview kind of way. And of course, if you have any questions or issues or concerns or details that you want to examine, then please mention that to me. And I'll try to do that in the next class if I haven't done it already. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Dear God, we're thankful for the opportunity we have today to be in your house. We're thankful for the previous night's rest, the amount of health that we enjoy that allows us to get out and about. We know that there are others that are struggling with physical health at this time, and others that have major concerns and challenges and surgeries in the days ahead. We pray that you would bless each one. Help us to study your word with open hearts. We know, Father, that life is a challenge. There are many things that demand our attention. And we pray that as we take a quiet time this morning to reflect on your word, that you will bless us, that we will be able to be enriched and motivated to go forth as your community in this world, to let the light shine of Jesus. This is our prayer in his name. Amen. So just the outline is good to kind of occasionally put in front of us of the book, and it also kind of reminds us of the purpose of prophecy as it's been, as we explore all of the prophets in the Old Testament, and that is that there is a oracle of judgment. The first section here in chapters, we have an introduction, tells us a little bit about Ezekiel and his vision and his situation, and he's by the river Euphrates. A tributary of that is called the Kibar Canal. That's where the captives were living, in shacks and tents and different make-up types of places that they could survive and do the work that the Babylonians had given them as slaves. They started as slaves in Egypt, and God made them a great nation, and they didn't obey his will, and so they went into judgment. That's what happened. Ezekiel is one of the people that went into captivity. It wasn't his fault, but he was, collateral damage. I mean, he had to go like so many others had to go. And so that section, chapters 4 through 24, are dealing with the sins of the people, the current generation, and of course the generations that went before. And then the thing about it is that they were being judged by a nation that was even more wicked and more ungodly than they were. This is Jeremiah's question to God in chapter 12 of Jeremiah. This is what the whole book of Habakkuk is about, in the sense that, well, yes, how long, God, are you going to wait to judge all this evil in the land? And God says to both Jeremiah and to Habakkuk, not long. I'm getting the Babylonians ready to execute the judgment. In the case of Habakkuk, he comes up with that second question. Well, wait, Lord, I know that we're evil and need judgment, but those guys are worse than we are. How can you send the Babylonians down upon us? I know that we're bad, but we're not that bad as they are. And what was God's response to Habakkuk? Do you recall? The just shall live by faith. In other words, I'm not giving you that answer right now, Habakkuk. You're going to have to trust me on that one. And of course, wow, that the application to us is huge. Like, are there ever things that happen, or even that God allows to happen to us, that we don't understand, and we don't understand why, and maybe other people around us that are inflicting the evil, that are evil themselves, are being flourishing in that situation, and we're not, and why is, and the whole answer that's repeated 3 times in the New Testament, the book of Hebrews, the book of Galatians, the book of Romans, is that the just shall live by faith. And so all of these prophets that God used were his servants in their generation. And the second part of this prophecy over here in chapter 25 through 32, here's the part where the Babylonians and all the other nations get their just deserts. In other words, God is using the Babylonians just like he used the Assyrians before, and then he judged the Assyrians. In 612, that nation went down. And he used the Babylonians to inflict that judgment upon them as well. And then the Babylonians, they were going to be destroyed, and the Medes and the Persians took over. And after God was finished with their usage, then Alexander the Great came along, and that power rose for a period of time until God was finished with that power, and then the Romans arose. And of course, we have a passage in Daniel chapter 2 that kind of shows how these successive kingdoms would be put into position of power by the God of heaven. And that in the time of that last mentioned power, the Romans, which we chronologically understand to be the Romans, that the God of heaven would set up a kingdom unlike any of these others, which would never be destroyed. And that's why when Jesus stood before Pilate, and Pilate asked him, "Are you a king?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were of this world, my servants would fight, but it's not from this kind of perspective." And so just to kind of look at the map here, and I do have my little pointer here. You can see my little green pointer. You see the Kibar Canal here? This whole area here, this river valley is called the Tigris Euphrates River Valley. It's also called Mesopotamia. The word Mesopotamia is between the rivers. What rivers? The Tigris and the Euphrates. You have the Tigris up on the top here. Years ago, when I taught freshman Bible at Florida College, I always had to teach geographical things and give, tests that tested the knowledge of the geography. And it's an important part of, every Bible, well, I shouldn't say that. Most Bibles that we have maps on the back of them. They're there for a reason. And the reason that we have them is to put it into context, to try to see what was going on in those places. And so you have the Tigris on the top and the Euphrates over here. And so this Kibar Canal area, this is where Ezekiel is. And this is where he has this vision that we're talking about. At the same time he's here, in the city of Babylon and the palace itself is the prophet Daniel. He's there with consistent audience before the king himself, Nebuchadnezzar. And his position was different. God used him in a mighty, powerful way in that position. And he got all of the benefits of living in the palace. He was never hungry. He could get whatever he wanted to eat. And he was picky about what he ate, but he could get whatever he wanted in the sufficient quantities he wanted and all of that. He had robes of elegance, and he lived in, and it was okay. It's okay to serve God in, Paul said, I've learned how to abound, and I've learned how to be abased. I know what it's like to have plenty, and I know what it's like to have very little. And I've learned that in whatever situation I'm in, to be content. These prophets were the same as Paul. And so Daniel did not allow his privileged situation to go to his head. And it got him into trouble sometimes. But God was with him and protected him. So that's where he is. All the way back in Jerusalem is where Jeremiah is at the same time. And this whole area you see in green in the Mesopotamian Valley, all the way from Ur of the Chaldees and Babylon here, all the way up through Carchemish and down through Riblah and to almost to the edge of Egypt. That's the extent of the Babylonian Empire. And so Jeremiah was in Jerusalem speaking to the people who had been left behind. If you go to these books, like if we go back to the first chapter of Jeremiah, it talks about this was the 30th year in the 4th month on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the exiles by the river Kibar, the heavens were opened and I saw visions of God. And on the 5th day of the month, it was the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel. Now, the 5th year of the exile of King Jehoiakim, we're talking 597s when the first year took place. So you count backwards there, and we're in the year 593, somewhere in that area. And that's the historical situation. And the people were wondering, how long is God going to allow this to happen? The temple was still intact in Jerusalem, but it wasn't going to be intact very long because the Babylonians were going to come and destroy it. And Jeremiah was preaching that truth. And he got into trouble for doing that because he was back home. And the people in power and in the temple were saying, no, shut up. We don't like that message. Throw him in the pit. They did. They threw him in. They were death threats. If you look at chapter 26, there's a death threat against Jeremiah. If you look at chapter 38, he's thrown into a pit to survive. Ezekiel is preaching the same message among the captives. He's already there. So the question is, are they going to get to go home really soon? Or are they going to stay a long time? All these prophets are saying, get comfortable. You're there for the duration. You are not coming home anytime soon. That was a negative message. Nobody wanted to hear it. Nobody wanted to hear it. And think about all of the people that had made that journey. You ever kind of compare what that would be like to go from this area of Judah and go all the way up through this area along the King's Highway and then go toward the east all the way to Babylon? If you look at this mileage here, it's like 400 miles just to get up to this area and another 400 miles to go to this area. So I tell my students, well, if you're going into exile into Babylon, it's like walking from Nashville to Tampa. You ever do that? Some people say, well, I've done the Appalachian Trail once or twice, or at least in small little pieces. No, forget the small pieces. One trek. Keep going. You're not going to have your Jordan Nikes on either. Okay? And so, think about that for a little bit, what that would have been like. And we think, well, there's mountains in Tennessee. Well, there's mountains in these regions too. There's valleys and up and downs. And that's what you had to do. And that's what they had to do. And they're wondering why God is allowing all of this to happen. And the people that are there to tell them why it was happening are called the prophets. People like Jeremiah, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Ezekiel, they're there to tell them why it's happening. And so in chapter 9, if we look here, it tells us, then he cried in my ears with a loud voice, saying, draw near, you executioners of the city, which each with his destroying weapon in his hand. And lo, 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces the north, every man with his weapon for slaughter in his hand. And with them was the man clothed in linen, with the writing case at his side. And they went in and stood beside the bronze altar. Now, these visions are always very vivid and graphic, and we can envision. The point of this is we can actually see, okay, well, here's men that are ready to slaughter. They've got swords and stuff in their hands. There's this other guy who's wearing he doesn't have the military outfit on. He's just sort of like got a linen garment on, and he's got a belt with a pouch over to one side, and this is where there's an ink bottle and some stylus writing instruments. And what is that all about? And we can get that vision, okay, and see it. So keep that thought, and we'll go on to the next part here. Now, the glory of the God of Israel. Oh, but let me just mention this. Do you see this detail here where 6 men came in the direction of the upper gate, which faces the north? So this is a description of the city of Jerusalem. And the city of Jerusalem, I didn't put the map up of the city of Jerusalem, but there are several gates all around. Gates for the garbage, and gates for where the sheep come back in, and gates for when the market is open, and gates facing the north. This is on the north side. Why is that detail there? Well, that's because that's the direction of the Babylonians. Whenever they come, they're going to come down from the north. So you see this, there's details there that have a certain significance. In the very first chapter of Jeremiah, there's this image of a boiling pot of water, and it's tipping in the direction of Judah from the north, okay? That the direction is important because it doesn't tell us exactly who it is, but we can pretty much assume it's the Babylonians. All of those people that came to invade the area of Palestine over the centuries came from the north, unless it was Egypt, and they came from the south. And so they were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, kind of like Poland in the Second World War. Well, your choices are Germany and Russia. It's not a good choice. And that's another discussion. So here we are with this one. And the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherubim on which it was rested to the threshold of the house. And he called to the man clothed in linen, who had the writing case at his side. And the Lord said to him, "Go through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed in it." So these are people like Habakkuk and Jeremiah, who were sighing and groaning about all the sins all around them and how evil the people were behaving and how God needed to judge this nation because of their sin. Put a mark on all those people who are sighing and groaning over the sins. In other words, they're my holy ones. Put a mark on them. And again, we can think about this in different ways. But, Paul says in the New Testament, "I know in whom I have believed, and I'm persuaded that he is able to keep that which I have committed against him," or what I have committed against that day. So does God know the righteous people among his people? Or among the world? Yes, God knows. And this is what this is sent to teach, that there's a mark on. God knows the people that are faithful to him. He also knows the people that are not. And this is a symbolism. It's symbolic. I don't think this took place in a literal way. It's a vision that Ezekiel saw, and he's revealing this to all of us so that we might know this is how God deals with it. Now to the others, the ones that do not sigh and groan over the abominations that are committed in the land, he said in my hearing, "Pass through the city after him and smite your eye." These are the people that are the ones ready to fight with the swords, right? "You go through the city after the one who's made the marks. And smite. Your eye shall not spare, and you shall not show pity. Slay the old men outright." It's not a nice picture. It's not an image that is pleasant to see, a kind of feeble old guy being cut down with a sword. He says, go do it. Young men, maidens. Now it gets even worse. Little children and women. They're going to be cut off as well. "But touch no one upon whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary." So they began with the elders who were before the house. What does this remind you of as we read it? Anything come to your thoughts on what happened in Egypt, Juan? The angel of death went through the land and killed the firstborn of every family. Except, which ones didn't he kill? The ones that were in the house that had the doorpost and the top of the door covered in, what was it? Lamb's blood. This is in Jewish religious history called what? The Passover. Because the angel of death passed over the firstborn. The angel of death was to kill the firstborn of every family, except the ones that were in these homes that had the blood on it. Sandy? Judgment begins at the house of the Lord. Yeah. Where's that passage? And verse 17. That's right. 1 Peter 4, verse 17. Yeah. Judgment begins at the house of God. So the point there is that we need to be recognizing that and to be ready to meet God at any time. And it begins in the sanctuary. Judgment begins. Anytime, and I know it doesn't look, it looks hideous to have children and old men slaughtered and so forth. I mean, it is. Judgment is always, think about what happened in Noah's day. Did any children die in the flood? Any old men die in the flood? Any maidens, young girls die? They all did. All of them died. Only 8 people survived. So judgment is sweeping, and judgment is consequential, and judgment has ramifications. And so if we believe this thing we call the Bible and the Word of God and the constant judgments that have taken place throughout history, and the promise of another one that's going to come eventually, then we understand that our position is to acknowledge that and to live in a certain way that we're ready to meet God. Just like Amos said to his generation, prepare to meet your God, O Israel. And they met him in the form of Sennacherib and the Assyrians. And they were vicious. Yes, sir.
This emotional attachment I have to age or innocence or whatever doesn't matter in God's eyes. It's just hard to be faithful.
Yeah.
So we make allowances, is what I think. We make allowances for people because, and it is called, and I'm using this the text is given, the description is given. It goes to different situations, and we may give them allowances for that. What God is saying is, I don't care.
There is a time and place to be very gracious toward widows and orphans and people in need. Is there stuff like that in the Bible too? All over the place. Yes. That's the day-to-day and the attitude we should have. But when it comes to the matter of judgment, and when God judges people, then it's going to be sweeping. And so what happens is, did God just send the flood right away, or did he give Noah opportunity to preach to his generation? It was a long time, right? He was preaching and teaching. And it took him a long time to build the ark, too. And he's preaching all along. What are you doing with what is that monstrosity? No, well, there's a flood coming. God is judging, and you need to be right with God. And I'm sure they made fun of him. They poked fun at him. And so forth. The same thing happened to all of the servants of the prophets that God had sent on the scene. And so all of these are opportunities for us to recognize, well, what can I do? Well, what I can do is, as a head of a family, I can take care of myself and try to live the right kind of life. I can encourage my spouse and my children and my grandchildren to do the same and be ready for God's judgment that will come. It could come in our time or it could come after we're gone. Either way, our destiny is determined by our life. We have this life to serve. And that's what happened in those days. Judgment did begin in the sanctuary, and then it went swept through the land. And so those are the things that I think that we can gain from reading these passages. And he said to them, defile the house and fill the courts with the slain. Go forth. And so they went forth, and they smote in the city. And while they were still smiting, and I was left alone. I fell on my face, and I cried, Ah, Lord God, wilt thou destroy all that remains in Israel in the outpouring of thy wrath upon Jerusalem? And he said to me, the guilt of the house of Israel and Judah is exceedingly great. I'll just pause here and say that has been the case in every judgment that we can read about in the biblical history. That the people did what was right in their own eyes. that the thoughts and the intentions of the humans in the time of Noah were evil continuously, until the point that God said, I regret that I made man, which is, again, an expression to help us understand God's intention there. And so God sent this punishment upon the people and spared Noah. It is interesting when you look across all of cultures of ancient civilizations across the world, there's all of them have this flood narrative in their history. In the Babylonian culture, there's a flood narrative, the Gilgamesh epic. In the Americas, where the Mayans are, in the Central America, there was the Popol Vuh, and that mentions the same this catastrophic great flood of ancient time. It is just indicative, I think, of the great impact that was surrounding that. We also find in Genesis, the beginning book of the Bible, that in chapter 11, I have a chance to speak about this since I'm a linguist. People say, it's so hard to learn languages. Why did this I says, don't blame me. I'm just the messenger, okay? It happened blame those people in Genesis chapter 11 in the Tower of Babel. That's when it all started. You know, people had one language before that, but then God saw their project, that they were trying to make a name for themselves and build this tower that would reach high into the heavens. And so God looked down upon that ambitious project with disapproval, and he scattered them all across the earth, and he confused their languages at the same time. And so there we have kind of an explanation in the very beginning of the Bible of the distribution of humans across the globe and the different languages across the globe. And that gives us a lot of information about it. And so God uses that time to teach. And the people that came after, the prophets and so forth, said that the judgment is always beginning with God's people first, and then he reaches out to these prophets, the prophetic books, the oracles against Judah and Jerusalem first, and then the oracles against the nations. And in terms of salvation, the gospel is God's power to save to the Jew first, and then also to all the rest of the nations. The salvation comes in that same pattern as well. Good discussion. If you look at verse 11, the man clothed with linen with the writing case at his waist brought back word saying, I have done as you have commanded me. And so, again, God is always, this indicates to us that God always makes a distinction between the people that are faithful and the people that are not faithful. And it's not like we actually need a literal mark on our forehead. This just is an image to God's people. It's a symbol to show that God knows. It's a way to describe the omniscience of God. He knows everything. He knows our hearts. He knows what we've done. He knows our thoughts. He knows when we've changed our mind about something. And the story of Ezekiel, we'll get to this soon enough, as far as the soul that sins, it's the one that's going to die, okay? And the one that's going to be held accountable is the soul that sins. It's not the parents or the grandparents, and the children are the ones, and the grandchildren are the ones that pay the price. The point is that the soul that sins will die. And if that soul decides to do what is right, then God will bless that person. If that soul or that person decides to do what is wrong, then God will send judgment upon that person. And it may not be immediate. You know, we feel like we want justice immediately. Right now, we're impatient. But God will judge in his time. And we need to, it's just like he said to Habakkuk, the just shall live by faith. You're going to have to trust me on this. Is there corruption in high places of power and even in courts of human judgment? Yes, there's corruption. Will there be corruption with God's judgment? Will someone have an envelope stuffed with bills and give it to someone and say, okay, I want you to take care of him. Is that going to work with God? No. Does it work with human court system? Yes. Unfortunately, it works a lot. It doesn't work all the time, and thank heavens for that. But unfortunately, in many cases, it does. There's corruption in high places, but not in the ultimate court of decision. And we need to remember that. So I looked, Ezekiel says, and beheld on the firmament that was over the heads of the cherubim, there appeared above them something like sapphire, in form resembling a throne. This is a vision, again, that's reflecting what he first mentioned in chapter 1. And he said to the man clothed in linen, go in among the whirling wheels underneath the cherubim, and fill your hands with burning coals. So this man with the linen and the pouch that had writing instruments at his waist, he gives the impression of being one of the angels of the host of heaven. We kind of draw these conclusions after we read all these things. And he says to this individual, fill your hands with burning coals from between the cherubim and scatter them over the city. And he went in before my eyes, and now the cherubim were standing on the south side of the house when the man went in, and a cloud filled the inner court, and the glory of the Lord went up from the cherubim to the threshold of the house, and the house was filled with the cloud, and the court was full of the brightness of the glory of the Lord. Does this remind you of anything? Revelation, you have the same image. What else? Isaiah's call, where you have this, Isaiah chapter 6, this big image of the glory and the cherubim. What about when they had the tabernacle and finished it? What happened? There was this cloud of fire, and then through the daytime, this cloud, and then the pillar of fire. And this was symbolic of God being present among his people. What about when Solomon built his temple? Anything happened similar to that at that time? Same thing. That was filled with the glory. And this image of smoke and fire, something that we can see. And this was indicative of the people that God was now among them. He wasn't before, and now he is. This is the whole story of the Bible. God said to Adam, and by extension to Eve, in the day you eat thereof, you will surely die. When they ate of that forbidden fruit, they were cast out of the presence of God. With the cherubim, same angels here. Cherubim are angels. The im at the end of the word is the plurality. It's like putting an S in English. We use an S to make something plural, or an es sometimes. And the im is the plural in the Hebrew for masculine nouns. And so the cherubim were there, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. This is indicative of God being with his people. When the veil of the temple was ripped, when Jesus died on the cross from top to bottom, and now it was open wide, this is indicative and symbolic of the path to God was made possible by the death of his Son on the cross. And that's why Matthew's gospel gives us that picture of the veil of the temple being split, because that veil was blocking the most holy place from the holy place. And the most holy place was where God was supposed to be. And nobody could go there except the high priest. And could he go any day he felt like it? Nope. Once a year. Could he go empty-handed? No. He had to have blood for himself and for the sins of the people. Is there power in the blood? There is. Because it's the blood of the Son of God that was shed on the cross, that paved that way possible to get back into the presence of God. That's the story of the Bible. Someone says, yeah, I read Harry Potter. It's kind of interesting. What's it about? Well, it's about Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer. What are those stories about? Well, life in the Mississippi Valley. It's interesting. Mark Twain's interesting writer. I'll tell you what. The Bible. It's a big book. What's it about? It's about man's sin, how he messed up and was no longer able to have a relationship with God. And the story of the Bible is how that relationship gets fixed. And it takes the blood of Jesus Christ. The bumper sticker that says Jesus is the answer, that's exactly the case. We all know what the problem is, but Jesus is the answer. And there's no other answer that is powerful or appropriate when you compare it to that. So this is where these passages are leading, of course. We read these passages in the Old Testament. These things written aforetime were written for our admonition and learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might embrace hope. We might have that hope. So why do we read these weird stories? Well, because they have meaning, they have history, they have the context of the Babylonian invasion and the crisis of the 6th century BC, and they set the stage for the people getting to learn their lesson in captivity and getting to go home eventually. And that's ultimately what message we want to have as well. You can look online and see a lot of artwork that has been done over the years about the wheel within the wheel. Sandy's dad was a machinist for 40 years and did a lot of drawings with things. And he used to think about these wheels within the wheels, and he said, Ray, they really could work. You could build it in a certain way. And even though that might be the case, we're envisioning it, that we can go in one direction, you go in the other direction. Maybe we can, how do you get an axle with a ball on it? And I don't know. You can go in this direction, you go in this direction. And of course, with an image, you can do anything. It's like the cartoons that our children and grandchildren watch. There's a lot of things that can happen. Even if you're Wile E. Coyote, you can get smashed, and the next day you go do it again. It's just a vision. It's just an image. And these images are there to show power, omniscience, omnipresence. God is everywhere. You can see an image of eyes all around. This idea of God knows that. You can't hide from God. You can't hide from Him with whom you have to do. And so I looked, and behold, there were 4 wheels beside the cherubim, one beside each cherub, and the appearance of the wheels was like sparkling chrysolite. Different translations use different jewelry, but you get the idea. It's sparkling and bright and beautiful. And as for their appearance, the 4 had the same likeness, as if a wheel were within a wheel. Notice that how it's translated. As if. Doesn't mean that literally it was that way, but it was like something. This is figurative language. We learned this in high school, at least we used to. What is a simile? What is a metaphor? What is onomatopoeia? I mean, all these different figures of speech. And this is how these are the ways that people who study language describe how people use language. That's what linguists and grammarians do. They have the whole body of knowledge, and then they say, well, there are rules. These are some rules that we can stipulate. There are exceptions a lot of times to rules. But when you use a word like if or like, this is a simile. It's a comparison to something. Was it exactly? No, but it was like it. And that's what we have to remember. It was like as if a wheel were inside another wheel. And where they went in any of their 4 directions without turning as they went. This is the kind of thing that the mind of a machinist really is curious about and tries to even draw it on paper and think about what kind of axle that might be that you could stick on it. But in whatever direction the front wheel faced, the others followed without turning as they went. And their rims and their spokes and their wheels were full of eyes round about the wheels that the 4 of them had. And as for the wheels, they were called in my hearing the whirling wheels. And every one had 4 faces. The first face was like the face of a cherub. That's singular. That's cherub, singular, and cherubim, if it's plural, right? The second face was the face of a man. The third was the face of a lion. And the fourth was the face of an eagle. And so this gives us this great image of this throne that's able to go in any direction with these 4 wheels within a wheel, which is this idea. We might call it casters today, but the casters actually turn. You see the people that have these suitcases in the airport, and they can go in one direction, they go in the next direction. Those wheels just swivel and turn. That's not exactly how this is. The wheels were set within the wheels, and they can go this way, and they can go this way, and they can go this way, and they can go this way. And so the idea is any direction. Can God go in any direction? Yes. Does God know everything? Yes. Can you hide from God? No. If you're really clever, can you hide from? No, you can't. And these are some of the conclusions that we want to reach when we look at this. So we didn't have time to finish chapter 11, and so we'll look maybe at a couple of these things next time, as well as the next. See, I had 4 slides left. Too much discussion on my map, I think. But anyway, our point is to use these times as fruitful discussions. If something is intriguing to you and you don't even want to ask a question in class, then you can see me after class, and I'll write it down and we'll talk about it next time. Thank you so much for your attention.